She had nothing. But when she spoke to a stranger on the street, her whole life changed. But wait, she didn't know he was a millionaire CEO. What happened next will shock you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The wind sliced through downtown Chicago like a silent knife, bitter and unkind, making even the boldest retreat into heated lobbies and steaming cafes. But 8-year-old Mia stood still beneath a flickering street lamp, her fragile arms hugging an empty paper bag as if it were armor, her golden curls tangled by the cold, and her blue eyes wide with hunger, hope, and the quiet ache of being forgotten. Her little brother had cried himself to sleep the night before, a thin blanket barely warming his shivering body, and Mia had promised him, with the innocence only a child could possess, "I'll find us something, I swear." Staring at the golden glow of a towering five-star hotel, its warmth mocking her from the other side of glass doors, she whispered softly, "Maybe, just maybe they'll let me have the scraps." She stepped forward, small boots barely holding together, pushing through the heavy revolving door with trembling fingers, eyes scanning the marble floor, the flowered columns, the glimmering chandelier that hung like a galaxy she didn't belong to. No one noticed her at first, just a smudge in their perfect world, until the security guard, with a voice sharp as the wind outside, growled, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Her lips parted. "I was wondering if you had food, like leftovers." But before she could finish, he cut her down with words like knives. "This is not a shelter. Get out." His hand gripped her shoulder and pushed her back through the door like an unwanted parcel, and the world greeted her with concrete, scraping her knees as she fell, pain blooming across her elbows, cheeks red not just from cold, but from shame, from being nothing in the eyes of those who had everything. She sat stunned, passers-by flowing around her like water around stone, no one daring to meet the eyes of a child who had dared to hope, and yet she blinked away her tears like her mother taught her, whispering, "We're strong, even when it hurts." From her battered backpack, she pulled a wrinkled cardboard square, drawn with markers she'd found in trash bins, and on it were the words "kindness equals hope," written in shaky but determined letters, a phrase her mother used to repeat when the world seemed cruelest. She leaned it against her chest as she sat by a cold lamppost, her hands rubbed raw, her stomach tight with emptiness, but her soul still quietly glowing, waiting for something, anything. And then she saw him, a tall man, maybe in his 30s, stood across the street, looking like he didn't belong in that world either. Not quite. His royal blue suit shimmered under the streetlight, hair black and windswept, his eyes tired, as if he were carrying a weight heavier than his briefcase. Mia didn't know why, but something in her heart nudged her forward. He didn't feel scary, didn't walk like the others, didn't look past her like she didn't exist. She stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her dress, legs trembling as she approached him. His back was turned, lost in thought, his phone still in his hand but no longer at his ear. Gathering every ounce of courage, Mia reached out and tugged the corner of his coat sleeve, her voice barely louder than the wind. "You look like you need a smile. Want one?" The man turned, startled, eyes locking onto hers, and time seemed to slow. He didn't see a beggar. He didn't see dirt or torn shoes or streetlight shadows. He saw her, really saw her, a tiny spark of hope standing in front of him with nothing but honesty in her eyes. And in that moment, Ethan Carter, billionaire CEO feared in boardrooms and headlines, felt something fracture inside his guarded chest, something ancient and human that had long been buried beneath contracts, deadlines, and glass towers. He didn't speak. He couldn't, because that small voice, so innocent and real, had pierced a place no billion-dollar deal ever could. He just stared at her, this little girl the world had kicked down, and felt for the first time in years like he was no longer standing above it all, but finally, deeply, heartbreakingly, grounded. Ethan slowly dropped to one knee, his tailored suit brushing the damp concrete, uncaring of the stains, because in that moment, nothing else mattered but the fragile girl looking up at him with guarded eyes and a wounded spirit that refused to break. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked, his voice no longer the confident tone of a CEO, but the soft tremble of a man rediscovering his humanity. Mia glanced away, her fingers nervously twisting the frayed ends of her sleeve, then whispered, "Mommy's really sick. She didn't wake up much today, and we ran out of bread yesterday, so I thought maybe the hotel would give me something. But they got mad. I wasn't trying to steal, I promise." Ethan's throat tightened as the weight of her words sank into his chest like ice water, and he found himself lost in the gravity of her quiet strength. "You must be really brave," he murmured. Mia's lips curled slightly upward, her chin lifting just a little. "Mommy says I'm her hero." There was pride in her voice, but also fear hiding behind it. A fear that spoke of nights without food, of coughing fits in the dark, of pretending to be okay so her mother wouldn't worry. Ethan reached into his coat pocket instinctively, not for money or a phone, but simply to offer his hand, palm open, not as a rescuer, but as a friend. She stared at it for a moment, unsure, then placed her tiny hand in his, the warmth of her skin shocking him with its fragility. "Would it be okay if I took you somewhere warm?" he asked. Mia hesitated, her eyes scanning his face, searching for signs of danger, deception, but all she saw was kindness. "You don't feel scary like the others," she said softly, and the words hit him harder than any corporate betrayal ever had. Minutes later, they sat in a cozy, forgotten corner of a quiet diner, where the smell of grilled cheese and old coffee replaced the bitter wind outside. Mia sat with her back straight, too polite to ask for anything, her eyes darting to every plate that passed their table. Ethan ordered soup and a sandwich without asking her preference. He just knew she needed warmth. As the bowl of soup arrived, steam curling into the space between them, she cupped it with both hands like it was the most precious treasure she'd ever received. "We haven't had warm food since last week," she admitted shyly. He nodded but said nothing, letting her speak in her own time. Between careful sips and tiny bites, she began to share pieces of her world, not in sadness, but with the simple honesty of a child who didn't know how to lie. She spoke of a small one-room apartment with broken heat, of coloring on napkins when paper ran out, of her mother's soft voice reading bedtime stories even when her breath rattled. She told him about the eviction notice taped to the door and how she covered it with stickers so her brother wouldn't cry. Ethan listened, every word peeling back the layers of his carefully built emotional walls. Mia smiled when she spoke about her teacher, Miss Harper, who once told her she was born to make the world smile. "She used to say I had sunshine in my voice," Mia said with a twinkle that had nothing to do with the diner lights. "But when we had to stop going to school, I guess the sunshine got tired." Ethan felt his heart physically ache. She didn't ask him who he was, what he did, or why he was helping. She wasn't impressed by his watch, his phone, or his expensive coat. She just spoke and listened, seeing only the human being in front of her, and not the empire behind him. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ethan wasn't being studied, judged, or feared. He was simply being seen. And as Mia dipped her spoon again, humming softly between bites, he realized this moment, this girl, had given him something no boardroom, no investor, no billion-dollar deal ever could. The chance to matter in a way that changed someone's life. But what he hadn't yet realized was that she had already changed his. Mia held the warm soup bowl with both hands like it was a sacred treasure, her small fingers soaking in the heat as if trying to chase away all the cold she had ever known. Each sip slow and reverent, her eyes closing as though tasting comfort for the very first time. She smiled at the waitress, whispering a thank you so gentle it almost dissolved into the steam, while across the booth Ethan rose silently, his phone already in hand as he stepped toward the corner of the diner, his heart pounding with purpose. He didn't wait for greetings or explanations, just spoke low and firm. "I need full information on Julia Moore, address, condition, everything. She's ill. Make sure a doctor's with her within the hour. Don't let her know who's behind it. Keep it quiet." His assistant stuttered on the line, unprepared for the sudden urgency from a man who usually only barked orders about mergers and profits. But Ethan ended the call before questions could start. He turned back toward the table, and there she was, Mia, with her tongue between her teeth as she concentrated, holding a red crayon in her hand, sketching uneven shapes across a napkin with fierce intent. When she noticed him watching, she beamed and turned the napkin toward him, revealing a lopsided heart with the words, "For Mommy," scrawled inside. "She says even if we don't have much, we have love," Mia said proudly, and Ethan felt something crack in his chest. Not pain, but awakening. The simplicity of that truth hit him harder than any Wall Street collapse ever could. While investors buzzed in his office about quarterly losses and media analysts speculated about his sudden disappearance from morning meetings, Ethan didn't care. For the first time in years, the noise of business faded into background static, and the only sound that mattered was the soft voice of a little girl who had nothing but still believed in everything. That night, without press, cameras, or corporate statements, he walked into the dim emergency ward of a public hospital, one his foundation ironically once considered demolishing, and made his way to the third floor where Julia Moore lay unconscious, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Doctors surrounded her, working swiftly after the anonymous emergency funding had suddenly opened up treatment doors she had been denied for months. Ethan stood quietly in the corner, watching the frail woman who had raised a daughter, with more grace than most people with fortunes. He didn't interrupt, didn't need to be noticed. He was there not for recognition, but because the ache in his chest wouldn't let him leave. Hours passed before Julia stirred, her eyelids fluttering weakly, confused by the white light above her and the masked figures beside her bed. As the doctor gently adjusted her IV, Ethan stepped forward, his voice soft, his words measured. "You don't know me," he said, standing beside her bed, "but your daughter reminded me of what really matters." Julia's lips trembled as she fought to speak, the effort costing her more than he could bear to watch. Finally, she whispered, "Why would someone like you help someone like us?" Her eyes were not filled with suspicion or fear, only disbelief, the kind born from years of being invisible to the world. Ethan took a shaky breath, blinking faster than he wanted to, and replied with all the truth he could gather in that one breath. "Because someone like her still believed that someone like me could care." Julia's tears escaped silently, trailing down the sides of her face, and Ethan reached out to gently adjust the blanket on her shoulder. Not because she asked, but because the act of care had finally become instinct, not obligation. In that hospital room, sterile and still, where beeping monitors played lullabies of survival, a silent pact was formed, not spoken, not written, but deeply understood between a powerful man rediscovering his soul and a dying woman who had never stopped believing in goodness, even as the world turned away. Outside, the city lights blinked indifferently, unaware that inside that room, redemption had quietly begun. 2 days had passed like slow-moving dreams, and though the city around them buzzed with noise and purpose, Mia walked beside Ethan as if the world had finally made space for her tiny steps, her shoulders wrapped in a soft gray coat 2 sizes too big, but warmer than anything she had ever owned, her eyes now full of light that hadn't been there before. The bruises of hunger fading beneath the glow of quiet care. Her boots, though still scuffed, clicked proudly on the pavement, no longer dragging in defeat. Ethan kept pace beside her, his usual fast stride softened, matching her smaller rhythm. The air smelled like coming rain, and the clouds above curled like secrets waiting to spill, but they walked slowly, as if this moment deserved to stretch longer than any deadline. Mia giggled at pigeons chasing each other near a hot dog cart, then turned a corner and froze. Towering above them was a skyscraper wrapped in digital light, every LED screen pulsing with color and ambition, and there, high above, was his face, shining with confidence beside bold letters. Ethan Carter, billionaire tech visionary. Her mouth fell open, eyes darting between the man beside her and the glowing name above. "That's you?" she asked, the wonder in her voice edged with something more fragile, confusion, maybe disbelief. "You're that man? The one on TV and in newspapers?" Ethan stopped walking, crouching low until he was eye level with her again, the same way he did the first time they spoke. He didn't rush to explain. He just looked at her, really looked, and said quietly, "Yes, that's me. But I didn't want you to see the suit or the name or what the world thinks I am. I needed you to see the part of me I lost a long time ago." Mia blinked, her lashes heavy with growing tears that she tried to fight. "Why would someone like you talk to someone like me?" she asked, her voice raw, not angry but aching, shaped by years of being looked past or looked down upon. He reached for her hands, holding them like they were precious, like he'd never let them go. "Because someone like you reminded me of who I used to be before I got lost in glass towers and golden distractions," he whispered. "You saw me when I forgot how to see myself." Her lips trembled as she looked away, overwhelmed, unsure if she should feel special or scared. The first drops of rain began to fall, gentle at first, like the sky was trying to cry without making a scene. Ethan didn't hesitate. He shrugged off his expensive wool coat, one tailored in Italy and worth more than most rent, and draped it over her shoulders, not for warmth, but for protection, a quiet gesture that screamed louder than any speech. They stood beneath the gray clouds, two silhouettes from opposing worlds, now stitched together not by wealth or pity, but by truth and something purer: connection. The world around them blurred. Cars rushed, horns honked, umbrellas popped open. But inside their moment, everything was still. Mia glanced up at him through the drizzle, her hair starting to curl at the ends, and whispered, "You don't feel far away anymore." Ethan's heart swelled, not with pride, but with clarity, the kind that comes after years of wandering in the wrong direction. In that silence, filled only by the patter of rain and unspoken trust, Ethan saw the truth. He hadn't saved her. She had rescued him from a life too full of things and too empty of meaning. His empire hadn't collapsed, but it no longer mattered the same way. The real empire was standing in front of him, wrapped in his coat, smiling through the tears, reminding him that love isn't bought. It's offered freely, like a smile in the cold or a hand when you're falling. The rain fell harder now, but neither of them moved. The street became a blur of color and motion, but their world stayed frozen in that sacred moment, where no one was rich or poor, just seen and understood. The rain had long passed, and the world had spun forward, but something had permanently shifted in both their lives. An invisible thread stitched between two souls who were never meant to cross paths, yet somehow became each other's turning point. Now, weeks later, laughter rang out in a house that had once known only silence. High ceilings that once echoed nothing but footsteps now danced with the sound of Mia's giggles, her tiny feet racing across polished wooden floors, sunlight streaming through wide windows like a warm promise. She spun in socks, holding a teddy bear Ethan had surprised her with, her joy uninhibited, pure, alive. Upstairs, Julia, still recovering but stronger every day, leaned against a doorframe with tears clinging to her lashes as she watched the life returning to her daughter. She hadn't dreamed in months. Dreams had been luxuries, but now she believed again. When Ethan walked in that afternoon, setting down a bag of fresh groceries like it was second nature, Julia turned and hugged him tightly, her voice cracking as she asked, "Why us?" Her hands shook as she looked into his eyes, unable to comprehend why a man with everything would choose to care for those with nothing. Ethan simply said, "Because she didn't see my name or my wealth. She saw the man I forgot I could be, a man who looked like he needed a smile." Julia wept softly into his shoulder, the burden she'd carried for years finally releasing into safety. That evening, as golden light bathed the living room, Mia tiptoed toward Ethan, holding something behind her back. "Close your eyes," she whispered. When he opened them, she placed a folded, hand-painted card into his lap. It was messy, colorful, and perfect. On it were the words, "You gave me hope without knowing my name. Now I know yours, and I still just see someone kind." Ethan stared at the card as his eyes filled, the corners of his mouth trembling into a smile that came not from pride, but from healing. That night he sat at his desk, the same one where he had once built an empire of numbers and ambition, and drafted the mission for something far greater. The kindness, Frank Hope Foundation, a quiet rebellion against the coldness of the world, created in Mia's honor, aimed at children turned away, dismissed, forgotten, children just like her. For the first time, his board members didn't question him. They just listened, perhaps for the first time with their hearts. Hospitals received anonymous donations, school lunches were paid in bulk, Scholarships appeared in the names of children who never thought they'd matter. His empire still grew. His name still flashed across screens. But the roar of numbers no longer satisfied him, like the quiet smile of a healed child. He attended fewer parties, skipped major galas, and spent more evenings helping Mia with her spelling words or building Lego castles with her brother, who had also begun to laugh again. At one fundraising event, a reporter asked him what had changed him so deeply. Ethan looked across the room where Mia stood beside Julia, holding two paper hearts she had cut out by hand, and simply replied, "A little girl once gave me something no amount of money ever could. She gave me back my soul." And though years would pass and his legacy would stretch far beyond anything Forbes could ever write, he never forgot. Not the rain, not the napkin heart, not the tiny voice that had spoken into the quiet of his storm. He kept that card, folded and framed above his desk. And every time he faced a hard decision, he'd look at it and remember the day a forgotten child looked up at a powerful man. Not with fear, not with awe, but with compassion, and said the words that changed everything. "Want a smile?"